Good. Okay, well, let's get started, and we'll let other people join as they show up. I will get the share going here. Okay, so everybody should have the ramp safety and operations in front of them. So this is module 4, ramp safety and operations. The cover picture is from Santa Barbara Airport when we did our Oregon firefighter airlift. And you'll see not one, not two, but 3 separate contraptions out there conveying material out to the planes. So let's see, requests. Number 1 is to click mute on your Zoom screen unless you're talking. Click unmute when you need to talk and click mute when finished. Type a chat with name and email address. Hopefully people have done that. Make sure your screen name is correct. And I'm going to stop the share for a second, and everybody go ahead and raise your hand. Let's see if we can have everybody raise their hand. And it's actually not like physically raise their hand, but press the little icon that says raise hand. Because if you want to ask any questions during the presentation, that's how you do it. Colette and Kim and Ed, have you found your raised hand yet? And Bob Tucknott, have you found it?
Oh, I can't find mine.
I know where it is. I was busy with something else.
I think it's under reactions. So if you have something that says reactions, you click on it. And you look for, no, that's not it. Where do we find raised hand, everybody?
Reactions, at least on mine.
Oh,
on the iPad, it's under the
reactions at the bottom. It says raise hand, kind of like a big space bar.
On the iPad, it's on the more selection.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so you can put your hands down. We'll assume everybody knows how to raise their hand, and we'll get back to the share.
This is weird.
Okay. So Mary, if you really have a question, go ahead and answer it. Otherwise, I'll let you figure out how to, you can ask your question. Otherwise, I will let you figure out how to lower your hand. Okay, so that's requests. So pretty simple presentation tonight. First, we're going to focus on ramp safety and then ramp operations with a lot of slides on material handling equipment and marshaling signals. So some people might ask, why manage ramp safety? Why not just have it be a jungle out there and let people do what they will? And the answer is that we're responsible. Our DART, our disaster airlift response team, is responsible for the people it allows on the airport. And as our operations get bigger, and if we really are helping the whole community and everybody shows up at the airport wanting a ride somewhere, that could be a lot of people and they could be hurt. So in all of our annual exercises, we try to exercise crowd control by having an operating area on the ramp and managing that operating area and getting some skills in managing safety. So ramp accidents can happen in many ways. We'll go over some of those on a following slide. People do kill themselves on ramps. You know, the propeller hits you in the head, you're gone. And we've seen that the busier our ramp operations get, the more likely there will be an accident, and the more likely that the people who are in charge are going to be too distracted, being overwhelmed with things, and cause a decrease in safety. So lots of things can happen. I already mentioned somebody died at my airport when they accidentally walked into a propeller, and you think, well, how on earth could anybody do such a thing? Well, you can be distracted. You can think that you know what you're doing, but you didn't know what you're doing and you got your head into the propeller. You might be lifting out chocks on a nose wheel when a propeller is going, and you might think you can miss that propeller, but maybe you couldn't. And it might surprise you how invisible a propeller is when it's spinning. You can't really see it very well. You have to know where it is. In Young Eagles, I've seen children horsing around on a ramp and shoot out under a guide rope right into taxiing traffic, which is right up against the guide rope, and that was kind of scary. Fortunately, that child didn't get hurt. So I've seen workers taxiing a whole lot of planes at one time. If you're like a ramp person marshaling a plane into parking, you might be leading that plane and having them follow you, and you're walking backwards towards a moving propeller and not even know it. And of course, there's so much noise on the ramp, you can't really hear that propeller right behind you. So pilots sometimes don't appreciate how unfamiliar people on the ramp can be, and they think, well, I'm just going to taxi down the ramp into parking, and they see some people there, but they think the people know what they're doing, and they don't, and bad things can happen. You know, once that propeller is going, it can be a long time between the time you hit your kill switch and the time the propeller actually stops. So let's see. So that's just some of them. Anybody have any additional ways that they've seen or heard of ramps, accidents happening out on the ramp?
Well, Paul, the same goes for dogs too. We had a dog killed on the ramp up here just because the dog wasn't on a leash. So that might be, you know, I don't know if people bring dogs out to the events, but just kind of something to be aware of.
Yeah.
I've seen someone injure their eye turning around and walking into a wingtip.
Okay. Don't want to lose anybody's vision because of that. Thank you, David. Thank you, Phil. So there's 3 ways to safely operate on the ramp. Number 1 is we can just let the airport staff and pilots enforce normal ramp access. And that's suitable if we're not having any special operation out on the ramp where we have introduced people out onto the ramp. Because airports are usually set up to keep people, you know, the general non-flying public and airplanes and ramps separated. Another way we can do it is have a DART operations area outside the airport fence. So all the work we're doing doesn't involve anybody on a ramp. And when it comes time to take somebody to the ramp, the pilot can take them to the plane, just like they would take them to the plane if there was no DART there at all. And a third way we can do it is to have a DART operations area inside the airport fence. And we can put up a temporary fence so everyone is clear on what they're allowed to stay within, and then enforce that line with safety personnel to catch the public if they inadvertently stray or something. And here's a picture of that. So here was a safety operation many years ago, not a safety, an annual DART exercise many years ago. You'll see this is a police barrier tape. The yellow tape says something like "do not cross." So it's a very handy little message. It requires voluntary compliance. You know, it might be a little bit better to have plastic contractor fencing rather than just a single tape line. This kind of a tape line isn't very good at holding 4-year-old kids or 3-year-old kids. You can see there's a little gate where the public and pilots can go in and go out. In this case, the airport fence has an access gate that's been opened up. The public's parking out on a dirt field there, and they can come in and talk to the DART and get service. So they can drop a package off to be shipped. They can come in and ask for a flight request. Pilots coming in off the ramp can come through the gate here and report to flight operations. So that's one example of how to cordon off a ramp. These are little traffic wands that you can buy on the internet, probably about 15 or 20 bucks a piece. You'll see the corner one here has some bricks on it because they don't stand up all that well. They get blown over easily. So it's a good idea to have ramp staff at your DART exercise or your DART operation, your mobilization, if you're going to allow non-flying public on the ramp, or if you're having a DART operations area on the ramp, which more or less implies you're having non-flying public on the ramp. And finally, if your DART is going to be providing service to pilots, that could be loading, unloading, it could be marshaling, it could be a variety of things. Those are all good times when you want to have ramp staff. So if you have more than one person on the ramp, one of those people might be a ramp manager and the rest of them might be ramp staff. The ramp manager ideally is the old hand that's familiar with all things to do with the ramp. And that person can ideally train anybody else that's helping out, because you could possibly have less experienced people there. And as long as they're under the watchful eye of someone who understands safety, everything will be good. So kinds of things you want to know are not only safety hazards, but marshalling signals. Some of the different techniques you can use, like wing walking, to get a plane into and out of a crowded ramp safely. If a person's been around a lot of larger air shows, there's crowd safety going on all the time there. And it's a good way you can pick it up just by observing how they manage their air show. Some of our airports, for instance, Santa Barbara, which we've operated out of a couple times, they have commercial service there, airline traffic there, and they are very particular about who they let on the ramp and what rules they have to follow while they have access to the ramp. So if you have a person who has local privileges and can keep the ramp staff on the proper side of the rules of all those privileges, that's very helpful. So that's your ideal ramp manager. Hopefully there's such a person available when you need them. Okay, so the most important ramp duty, don't worry about loading planes. Don't worry so much about some of these other services. Keep the ramp safe. And there's a lot of ways to do that. We can ensure that the public is escorted on a ramp. So you might think, well, gee, the pilot can escort people. And certainly pilots can. But sometimes if you're sending somebody off somewhere, their family wants to come out and get a picture of them in the plane or wants to say goodbye at the plane. And then somebody needs to escort that person back to the operations area safely when the pilot's in the plane and no longer available to do the escorting. Another way to keep the ramp safe is to ensure that pilots are exercising good propeller safety. So that could mean getting a starter in front of the pilots before they start up, so that that starter has a view into the blind spots, the 6 o'clock for the pilot, and can have additional vision on if anybody is presenting a safety hazard for that start. So children, they love to roughhouse. They don't understand deathly hazards very many times. So make sure that they are only allowed on the ramp with a responsible adult, and that that adult is doing a good job of supervising them. And certainly you could ask a child to step outside the airport fence if they're not. Gary, go ahead. You'll need to.
Yeah, just one thought came to mind. I've been around ramps since I was 4 years old, and I just recently learned that you should never stand in the plane of the spinning propeller. If it picks up FOD, it can spit it out sideways. If a tip comes off, it's going to spit out sideways 2 or 3 degrees either side of the propeller. I got taught that at Oshkosh while I was walking a wing, and so don't take for granted that all of us old timers know all of it. And that's one little tidbit I wanted to share.
Thank you. Oshkosh does a lot of wing walkers. They have an RV parking area where they will close down a pedestrian walkway with rope. And once everybody's off the walkway, then the planes can taxi by, and they'll often have wing walkers to grab people if for some reason they break the rope line. Oshkosh is a wonderful place to observe safety practices and safety techniques. You can consider towing pilots in if you've got a really busy ramp. Get a tug out there and just tow people into parking rather than have them taxi into parking. Another thing that can be done is, and I guess we've talked about the rest of the things there. So any questions on safety on the ramp or any suggestions or comments?
I do. The bullet about ensure children inside operations perimeter won't actually depart it during horseplay. Why is horseplay being allowed? I would suggest that it say children are not allowed to push or shove or run around in that area.
Sure. I have never seen a ramp that has a sign that says children's horseplay is not allowed. Maybe that sign should be there. And certainly it can be sensible to not only have safety people on the ramp, but safety people inside the operations area, so that if you see a parent that's not adequately supervising their child, you can go up and talk to them. That's a good
I
point.
don't
Mary?
think children are gonna just understand the word horseplay. You gotta spell it out very specifically, no running, like they do around a swimming pool. Things
Sure,
like that.
sure. Very good. Mary, you have a comment. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, so I'm just curious if perhaps Oshkosh or some of the other bigger air shows actually has a ramp safety best manual or guide they've put together, because these are all good pointers, but it would be really nice to have it in a format where you could actually pass it out to either people that are going to be on the ramp or, you know, even the pilots.
Sure. Gary, did you say you just volunteered at Oshkosh on ground operations?
I was actually an impromptu volunteer. They asked if I would help them. But I do go every year. I don't have any, well, actually, I got a cousin that volunteers every year, and we should look into that. Mary has a great point that why reinvent the wheel if it's already been polished pretty good there.
That
And
would be
if it's-
great. And you two are both from Lincoln Airport, right?
Grass Valley.
Oh, excuse me,
Valley.
Grass Valley, up the road. If you two could take that on, that would be a wonderful service. Do you think between the two of you, you could look into it?
Yeah, I'll
Sure.
between the two of us, we'll it's got to exist.
Okay, yeah, this is probably a whole lot better than something like this if we can get our hands on a manual like that.
Thanks, Gary.
Okay, so possible other ramp staff duties. So once we've got safety accomplished, well, we could load and unload planes. We can transport cargo between customer service and the planes both ways. We could provide marshaling service to get pilots into the right parking spot. We can team up with flight ops for fastest loading, and I'll go into that a little bit further on a future slide. We can direct arriving pilots to check in at flight ops. Sometimes they don't do that, and so a helpful reminder as they're getting out of the plane is good to put them in the right direction. And by the same token, we can escort arriving passengers to customer service. So if they need to check in, they can. I think I mentioned on an earlier session that we don't like to double document things, but on the other hand, if a passenger hasn't been documented on the other side of an operation, well, then we certainly can document them on the arriving side. And finally, a courtesy radio can be a handy thing. Pilots will arrive and they don't know which ramp to turn off to for the DART operations, or they may have some urgent need that they want to flag ahead of time. And if you got somebody on the radio, they can help out. So as ramp staff, what do you do when you get to the airport? So number one, hopefully you've got a chance to wear the uniform. And by the way, for my folks at Grass Valley, I pulled out 5 vests and I need to mail them to somebody. So we're on our way to getting you some vests. And the same for Bob Tucknut. I think I saw him check on earlier tonight with Livermore. Okay, so that's vests. So dark blue pants, white shirt, and a dark vest or a general safety vest. On the ramp, it's not as necessary to have the dark vest, and some people even prefer like the chartreuse lime green total visibility color than to the blue dark color just for a little bit of extra visibility. So either way is fine. Sign the volunteer waiver. We need to also sign the personnel duty roster, get everybody checked in as they go. That's one part of the signing for any volunteer, including the ones on the ramp. Before you open up the DART to operations, make sure you've got your crew trained. So there's always a variety of experience on the ramp, so you can find out who's got the most experience. You can talk through what all the various situations are that you're going to be trying to protect for, and share all that knowledge and get everybody's skills upgraded, and then you can go into service. Certainly cordoning off the public area on the ramp before beginning operations. I showed one example of that on the early slide in this presentation. But the ramp staff can help set up that cordoned area before they get out on the ramp, managing the planes. And another important thing, if you are going to do material handling, is assemble material handling equipment. So we'll talk a little bit more about all the different kinds of material handling equipment on a future slide. And by golly, that sets up, here's some material handling right away. Here is a very cheap wagon, cargo wagon, ordered off Amazon, rated for 300 pounds, terrible welds, terrible quality of manufacturing, and falls apart quickly. So not really recommended. Here is a classic pallet jack with a pallet and a whole bunch of stuff on it. These are real handy to have around a ramp. This aircraft operation here was at San Martin. That one there is on Santa Barbara. And so this little guy in the background, it's a little bit hard to see, but it was lifting this pallet, and it's like a souped up pallet jack. A guy can step on it, and he's got a little electric motor so he can wheel around the ramp. It's not quite as powerful and dangerous as a forklift, but it's a step up from a pallet jack. And this particular pallet jack came off the 18-wheeler that happened to roll out on the ramp that day for that exercise. Then here we have a deluxe wagon. This is, I think, a 2,000-pound rated wagon from Granger. A little bit expensive, but really good. It's got little ribs on the edges there, 1 inch high. So if you're on a ramp that vibrates or is sloped, you're not going to lose your boxes sliding off of it. It's a nice piece of equipment. Here's some people from Team Rubicon that were out helping us at an exercise one year. And don't underestimate the power of the human body. So this may be your primary cargo handling right here. Lots of volunteers that can each grab a box. Over here, this was Rick Ortiz having picked up a load of 5,000 face masks from a FEMA trailer that was available to CalDART. He held it for a few days in his pickup truck, and then drove it down to, that might be Sacramento Executive, I'm not sure which airport it was, where he passed it off to a fellow who flew it down to Chino for Liga International, which needed face masks during COVID. They're the Flying Doctors of Mercy. So yeah, pickups, and this one with a covered top on the back of it. Nice material handling equipment. If you're at an airport with an FBO, you'll see these luggage carts like hotels use, and they do a pretty decent job moving cargo around. This particular cargo was face masks gone to Sacramento for kids up in the foothills who were starting school during COVID. These were special needs kids. They couldn't put on a face mask because they couldn't have their faces covered, but they could wear a face shield. So we got them a whole bunch of face shields. Now here is a combination of things. We recognize our pallet jack with the pallet, and turns out they just barely fit onto a box truck with a lift gate. And this is a really handy way, if you don't have a full-blown forklift with forks that lift up 4 feet high, this is a nice way to get cargo by the pallet out of the truck and onto the ground. And we don't really recommend that our chapters or our darts go to the expense of buying a $5,000 or $10,000 forklift. Not only are they expensive, but if you don't have a qualified operator, you can hurt somebody very badly because they're so massive. Gary, go ahead.
I taught forklift safety, and what you're looking at right here is being done really, really well, but it's also really, really easy for that thing to spin off. So proper training in electric forklift, if the driver shows up with it, he's likely certified. But if you don't have the certification, a pallet jack doesn't require it, but the tailgate does. And that's throughout California.
So that's interesting. So if I'm operating a pallet jack on a tailgate, overall, I need a certification because the tailgate's hazardous.
Yes, and it's a certification for the tailgate, not the pallet jack. But,
okay.
But pallet jacks, because they seem so benign, are actually a leading cause of injury.
Okay, yeah, because
Um,
people like me that don't know what they're doing, use them and then hurt themselves.
Yeah, pallet jacks and even the carts we were looking at earlier should also have attached to it its own wheel chuck. So as you're unloading, it can't roll and hit another plane or something. That's something that's often overlooked.
Ah, excellent point. Okay, anything else of your wisdom to impart?
No, I worked at Google X and I taught brilliant people how to drive a pallet jack, and it was very interesting. Maybe when there's more time, I can give you some anecdotes about that.
I'll bet. Okay, Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say I work for a nonprofit. We drive a 30-foot box truck all over the state. I've worked the tailgate, I've worked pallet jacks, hand jacks. You know, I can't imagine why you'd need a certification for a tailgate. It's not that hard and it's really obvious. It's quite frankly not something I would worry about. It does take some experience learning how to get the pallet jack on the tailgate, but it's something that can be learned pretty quickly, especially if you have a couple of people helping.
I noticed that this guy had to deal with some issues that the tailgate wasn't flat. And so suddenly his very heavy load tended to want to drift on that lift gate. So I don't know if there's brakes built into the pallet jack or what, but he knew what he was doing. But I would have been very pressed to try to do that myself.
You know, what a lot of people do with the, when they get on the pallet jack, once they start to lift it up, they release the brake and drop the pallet on the lift gate so it can't move. That's typically what people do.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Gary, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say I agree with all of that. The key thing is a little bit of training versus none. If the tailgate isn't level, like this picture here, it shows it slightly downhill. The way he's got his wheels 90 degrees, it would spin if the pallet wasn't sitting on. So as soon as you turn it 90 degrees, there's a certain coordination where you grab the handle in it and the pallet comes down and becomes the brake. It doesn't take much training, but if you have none, it can run away pretty quick.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, more material handling equipment. This was kind of neat. Somebody at this exercise, one of the DART volunteers, had a full-on flatbed trailer that you could put a D8 Caterpillar tractor on. So it moved everything that needed to go that day very easily. You're not going to see this at very many operations, I don't think. Here's another person from the Yurok Indian tribe schlepping some equipment back to their truck. And you'll see in the background another pickup truck and a closed trailer. So up in the Northwest, it rains a lot. And if you're going to have a trailer to carry stuff, it's nice to have an enclosed trailer that's weatherproof. This was taken off a little news spot for Thunder Run from this year's exercise out of Canada and Washington State and Oregon. But the little cart that they're pulling here, this is a classic gardener's cart. You can get these at your various garden shops, and they are probably good for about 300 pounds or something. High sides so the boxes don't fall out. Nice pneumatic tires so they go over cracks and things very easily. Not too expensive. And then, so this was, let's talk about how to get people to be efficient on the ramp. If you're trying to move 10,000 pounds of stuff and you have limited people and limited pilots, you don't want to sit around an hour loading. And I've seen that happen where a pilot might get there and it takes an hour to load his plane. That's not very efficient. The best technique I've seen is where you go to the plane with way more stuff than what the pilot can put into the plane. So the ramp goes out there, the ramp staff pushes it out there. You have a person from flight operations with this crew and flight operations, because they're going to fill out an aircraft load sheet to document what actually went inside of the plane. And then the pilot, because the pilot is responsible for the weight and the balance, the pilot actually takes the stuff out, decides what's dense and can go someplace in his plane, decides what's light and bulky and should go in the back of the plane, and fills out his load to his optimum weight. He doesn't have to fill out any paperwork because the flight ops staff person is doing that. And the ramp crew brought all the stuff there in the first place. Now, we still need to assign a flight member to the aircraft load sheet. So the person, the flight ops staff person there, pulls out their walkie-talkie and they radio into the flight operations desk and say, I've got my aircraft load sheet. We've got this tail number filled up. He's ready to go. What flight number is it? And this is the total weight. And by the way, I just took a picture of it with my phone and I just texted it to you. So they have a copy of the aircraft load sheet right there at flight operations. Any questions about that? Okay, and in this particular case, it's a little bit difficult to see, but there's 2 luggage carts and a pallet jack with a tall load of goods on the pallet. So they're taking out way more stuff to that plane than can be loaded. Mary, go ahead.
Yeah, just verifying that ultimately the pilot in command is the one that's going to supervise and be the final arbiter of the cargo.
Absolutely. So the
Okay.
flight ops staff is there as a service, can provide him a running count of the weight that he's got in his plane so far. But the pilot puts it in the plane where he wants it. He reviews or she reviews the aircraft load sheet to make sure that the weight has been properly added and that it's something that his plane can take. And yes, we have a pilot certification and waiver of liability that the pilot signs as a part of being a DART pilot. And that's one of the paragraphs, is that he's in charge of ensuring that his aircraft has a proper weight and balance for a flight. Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. So let's see.
I'm just curious, are each one of those boxes labeled with the weight on it?
They are.
Oh, cool.
So the customer service function, when they receive the material, they put it on a scale and they put a label on it and weigh it. In this particular case, we sidestepped the entire customer service function. We only had a flight ops that day. And this was direct relief of Santa Barbara. They gave us all this stuff. Their shipping department put packing labels on it for us, and each of the packing labels had a weight for that box. So we used those weights when we were doing our weights and balance. Yes, Phil?
So Paul, after something's weighed, is the top like secured with tape so people know the package has been weighed and not to add anything else, so the pilot knows it's absolutely accurate?
I have not seen that done. Of course, we don't recommend that people tamper with any goods that have been checked in with customer service. That's not a proper thing to do. I can imagine where it might happen, and I've not seen anybody try to adjust for that. That's a good thought. We have talked about keeping storage areas secure, but I think what it would probably be some well-intentioned person that stuck something in that was heavy that then messed up with the weight and balance. So that's a very astute observation and comment. Thank you, Phil.
Paul, I have a question about the order of things being done. Does the pilot tell flight ops how much weight he can carry first? Or do they say, we need you to carry this much?
So the pilot is a part of the intake process to get into the exercise and be an approved pilot. Fills out a pilot and aircraft information form, and the pilot details what his aircraft can take from a loading point of view. So there is a maximum number associated with that pilot. Now, it doesn't say anything about balance, so the pilot still retains responsibility for making sure the balance is right. And depending on the payload and depending on the shape of the load and the density, he may or may not be able to achieve his rated full payload on any given load. Okay. So now, how do we get more utilization out of the ramp staff? So we've just talked about pilots to try to minimize the downtime that they have waiting to be loaded. I've seen ramp staff get poorly used as well. And in that example I just gave, where the ramp staff rolls things up to the plane, once they get the material there, they're really out of it. And it might take 10 minutes or 20 minutes to load that plane, maybe as much as 30, depends on how finicky the pilot is and how difficult it is to load and get everything documented. So if the ramp staff just sits there and waits for 10 to 30 minutes, that's not a good use of their time. So as soon as they've got the stuff there, the pilot's loading, accompanied by a flight operations person that's filling out the aircraft load sheet. Now the ramp staff is freed up to go serve some other plane and can put stuff there. And we'll come back to this plane when they're done and then take the unused materials and bring them back to the material storage area, or get them replenished so that the pallets are now full again, waiting for the next plane to come. Any questions on this concept? Okay, so now we get into marshaling signals. And I'm not the best person to train this, as I'm not a trained marshaller myself. Do we have anybody on the call who's been through a formal marshaling school? Well, feel free to jump in if I explain anything wrongly. So this particular plane was Brian Deere from Palo Alto flying up to Walla Walla, Washington, and getting marshaled into parking on the ramp. This was at the very beginning of COVID, when they were out of PPE in Walla Walla, and we were getting a load of face shields up there for their emergency operations center. So for turning left, this guy here, he's pointing to the left. Now, of course, that's his right, but we're talking pilot's left. So with the right hand, he's pointing to the pilot's left. And with the other hand, he's going up and down, bending from the elbow, indicating that the pilot should do a left turn right at that point in time. And then the inverse of that for turning right. Now we have three more things, and some of them aren't spelled right. So if they want you to hold, they're going to put their hands down by their sides and just hold them there. And they don't want you to move forward or move backward, just stay parked until you get a signal from them. Many of you have probably seen the middle signal when the person's at a parking spot facing the way that he wants you to nose in towards him. And that's the signal right here. And then as you pull into place, they'll start bringing their arms in towards their head and finally cross them when they're ready for you to shut your engine and stop. So you can't see it when the chocks are in the wheels. So once they place the chocks, they'll come back up and give you the chocks inserted sign, which is taking their two wands and putting them in together below their waist. And so I guess it can be given on a low basis or it can be given on a high basis, either way. Now for an emergency stop, this is like boom, very fast, and it's multiple times to an X. So they want you to stop right there quickly. For chocks removed, before we saw him place the wands under his waist. Now he's moving them out to the side on a rotating motion. That's as they're removed. And he can also give the same thing above his head, going left and right. And now when he's ready to have you move ahead, he'll be going, this one you can see like this, with his wands having you move ahead towards him. Now, straight ahead is out to the side. And let's go back and compare that with the previous motion right here. Emergency stop goes all the way to a crossed position, whereas if it's moved straight ahead, it doesn't get crossed. It just goes out. It stops at about 1 o'clock or 12:30. And again, this is a repeated out and up signal. Then we have slow down, moving the arms down lower with generally a horizontal location on the chalk, on the, excuse me, the wand, the traffic. Anybody know what this is called? Is this a wand? Could be a flashlight. Basically, they're flashlights with plastic tips on them, so they show up at night. Now to move back, he's crossing his hands and wands and doing a circle in front of himself here, and that's to go backwards. Most of us piston planes engines don't have the opportunity to go backwards unless we're on a steep hill. Stop engines is the classic cutoff sign across the throat, going left and right. Start engines, this assumes there's multiple engines, but one hand out to the side with the other one spinning up and like in a circle above his head. Proceed. Now, I was kind of curious about how proceed is different than move ahead. See this move ahead? Is anybody here schooled on the difference between proceed and move ahead?
I think proceed is if you're already in motion, you don't have to marshal to start the motion or accelerate it. I've seen this one where there's 2 or 3 different people doing the marshaling, and you pass one, and another person is standing, doing the proceed motion. So
Okay, so in
it's kind of
essence,
like en route.
with both hands, they're pointing in the direction that you should be going, and you just proceed.
And yes, basically you're on your own.
And Bob Goodwin.
On your own. I was going to say the same thing.
Okay, thank you.
In my experience, that means he's done marshaling you and you're going to taxi out now, and he's going to back out of the way when he does that. And that's what's happened with me anyway. The people who marshal my plane, that's the last thing that they do.
Well, thank you for the help on that one. Answer mystery solved. Okay, so now when they want you to move back, now move back sounds an awful lot like move back. So we've got 2 different signals for move back. So if you don't see the circling hands, you may see the rotating arms, both meaning essentially the same thing. And here is, you've been connected to ground power, not generally going to happen with our planes. And that would be disconnected from ground power. So when you're pulling the 2 wands apart, as opposed to plugging them in together. And here's an all clear sign. One arm is up, the other arm is down. And here's a negative sign, like don't go. And holding the hands against the ears, establish communication. And that is it. Who has any questions or comments or suggestions?
I do. Paul, could you go back about 3 slides? There was one about moving forward, I think, where they had their 2 hands above us before this slide. Yeah, the straight ahead one. Next slide, forward.
This one?
That one. Yeah, I don't think that's drawn correctly, because when they've done that with me, with the Civil Air Patrol, the wands are actually pushed out in front of the marshaller, and he's moving them back and forth toward and away from him. Kind of like this. I don't know if you can see my picture, but like that, rather than sideways.
Can anybody else comment on this?
I don't think that one's drawn correctly.
Okay.
Paul, in
Yeah.
the Air Force, now this may be military, but that was straight ahead.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah. You
Same
did
way
see
with
that
the
one
Navy.
earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, where did we see that one? This is static, it's not moving.
Keep going. It was move ahead. There it is.
Yeah, this is the one you all are talking about, move ahead.
Oh, maybe, okay.
Might just be, how do you draw this motion with?
Yeah,
arrows?
exactly. And that, Colette, that's the exact motion that I'm talking about.
Huh, so straight ahead might be a little bit different than move ahead. Like maybe this is when he's not facing you, but he wants you to go straight ahead.
I've seen both of them used interchangeably.
Okay, and by the way, Bob Goodwin is our token airline transport pilot that has looked at a lot of martial arts. Thank you for the suggestion, Bob, or the comment. Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Nope.
Okay, well, everybody, I hope, has put their name and their email address in the chat, and put everybody back so we can wave at each other. Good to see everybody tonight. Tomorrow night, we're having the DART Incident Commander presentation, which will be the last presentation in this series of 5 training presentations. So thank you all for showing up tonight, and I look forward to seeing some of you tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. These